myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say to...
Good morning, welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith. I am still waiting for Ben Jacobs. He is on his way, but what I'll do is thank the sponsors first. Then I've got quite a bit to read to you from Swiss Ramble. Some of you will have seen it, other of you won't have seen it. It was a tweet that was put out in August by a Twitter account which explains financial fair play for us mere mortals, because I've got to be perfectly honest, I'm quite ignorant of what it all means. I couldn't swear to, to even say that I understand what it means at times. It's very, very confusing, but I do think that this particular Twitter thread helps us massively. So I am going to go through that with you. Feel free to drop in comments, etc., and then I'll bring Ben in when he comes in. A big thank you, though, to our sponsors, skipsandbins.com, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3, email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, website www.skipsandbins.com, easy contract free and pay as you go waste collection. Thanks to Darren Baldwin Funerals, independent funeral directors based on 304 Old Durham Road, Gateshead. You can find them at www.darrenbaldwinfunerals.co.uk or by calling 0191 478 2730. Big thanks to Garden of Healing Dispensary, CBD, hemp and cannabinoid specialists, www.thegohd.com. And big thank you to Philip Reed. They are 3 property investments who specialise in sourcing investment properties for their clients who are looking to invest in North East. They offer a full in-house service from sourcing the deals to managing the properties for you. They've done over 100 plus deals in the past 12 months for clients all over the UK. Give the guys a follow on Instagram, matty.patter_northeast property and phil.reed_northeast property. Or you can email phil@3property.co.uk should you be interested in getting a good property deal. Thanks also to Mr. Vicky's Sauces, handmade in Cumbria. You can find them at mrvickies.co.uk or by calling 01768 210 102. Thanks to Media Arts and thanks to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend, Newcastle, and the guys who run our website, nufcmatters.com. If you want to subscribe to the show, hit the NUFC Matters logo in the bottom right-hand corner, and you can subscribe for free. Hit the thumb up to like the video, click share to share to your social media. We're also available as a podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and the rest. If you want to help the channel financially, then click join, and you can become a member, or you can use nufcmatters.com and become a cult member. And that is by going to the membership page on there, or use your smartphone over the QR code. It will take you straight there. What do you get for your money? You get a pen, a cup, a scarf, and a membership card, and entry into the monthly draw. If you like something for free, and let's face it, who doesn't, get yourself onto nufcmatters.com and email John at the website, and he will send you out a free car sticker. We also support the food bank on here. NUFC fans, foodbank.co.uk is the virtual bucket. You'll be able to make a virtual donation there any time of the year, and it is a big help to those people who are finding day-to-day living at this moment a big struggle. Don't forget as well, the ASM shirt has 24 hours to go, $2.95 a ticket. The link is in the chat if you want to enter that. It is signed, it is framed by ASM, and well worth a punt. And the NUFC Matters Takeover Party takes place on the 7th of October, exactly a year to the day of the takeover. Tickets are £2 on the door, proceeds to the food bank, but you can buy tickets in advance, and we are asking people to buy tickets in advance for that. NUFCmatters.com. Nothing going on, just a chance for Newcastle fans to get together, people off the platform, and have a big crack about the anniversary of the takeover. And right on cue. Thank you, Ben. It's been a busy morning for you with Tuchel getting sacked, mate.
Yeah, it has. Good morning. And it's my day off, at least until the Champions League starts a little bit later. So apologies, I'm late and this will be a short one. But Chelsea decided to sack Thomas Tuchel overnight. And no real surprise on that. I think a lot of fans are maybe shocked by it, but the new ownership group weren't really judging him solely on results. They were also looking at the whole summer And there was kind of, as you find in a new business, Newcastle probably did the same, a 100-day period where you look at what you've got, you make any changes, strategically based, football based, financially based, and so on. You tie down what you've got, you bring in who you can during a window, and then, of course, your new era starts. So I think from Chelsea's point of view, even though everyone really wants to hear about Newcastle, they have come in, and the reason why it's quite interesting from Newcastle's point of view is naturally because they've got quite a good relationship with Newcastle's owners, and they share a lot of the same values really around building a culture. And I think both clubs have come off the back of very atypical ownership models. Chelsea liked their old owner a lot more than Newcastle did, but if you look strategically at how the club was run, the use of data, the transparency, the openness, and so on, there are some similarities. And what the Chelsea owners did is they first of all appointed a new board, then they assessed what they had. They obviously got rid of Marina, which is normal in a transfer window because you don't want an outgoing sporting director lingering, because in her case, you don't know where she's going to go next. And there's confidentiality issues as well. And Bruce Buck was always going to be replaced by Todd Lee as well. He came in wanting to be chair. He just couldn't say that part during the pitch process because Buck was determining who was actually going to buy the football club. And then you have a transfer window, so you can't make too many football changes. But I think it's no surprise, regardless of the poor result last night in Zagreb, that Tuchel's departure has come after the transfer window, not during, because it was probably one step too far to not have a manager during a transfer window, to spend so big without that manager and have an interim sporting director in Todd Boehly. So I think from day one, they wanted to give Tuchel a chance, but it's been clear for quite some time that he was not part of the cult, willing, despite wanting the autonomy, to make the step up from head coach to assuming managerial and strategic responsibilities. And Eddie Howe, I would imagine, is a little bit different in that respect. He's more supported by experience. He's got Dan Ashworth, obviously, to take a number of the calls, but I think that Howe is quite prepared to have that direct line with the ownership group and do things for the football club that are not just football. And that makes him a good fit, not just as a manager, and fans look at that first and foremost, but as an ambassador for the club, as a businessman for the club, as a senior strategic thinker who forms part of the thought leadership. And that's where Tuchel was really lacking. Ultimately, a head coach that wanted his say, wanted his players, wanted his authority, wanted his decisions, wanted to do it his way. And the new ownership group had other ideas.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks for your insight into that. I'm going to do a little bit of reading here now, and I make no apologies if you've already read this, because I still think that me and Ben did say we would come on and try and dissect financial fair play at Newcastle in layman's terms. And I think Swiss Ramble on Twitter did just that. So I make no excuse for reading this. It gives me and Ben just a chance to refresh as well, because it's about a month since this was put out. When Newcastle United were bought by a consortium led by Saudi Arabia's PIF, the expectation was that Newcastle would splash out on players due to the enormous wealth of the new owners. That really hasn't been the case. So why is the club not spending big? Manager Eddie Howe gave his answer. Financial fair play impacts us and will continue to impact us for a number of years. We haven't got the free rein that maybe has been perceived within the media, that we can go and sign who we want and pay extortionate fees. Despite the fact that Newcastle new owners had stated their ambition was to win the Premier League in 5 to 10 years, Howe sounded a note of caution. We're having to be creative and smart and try and make the right additions within the financial constraints that we have. The spending ability is limited by the Premier League profitability and sustainability P&S rules. These allow a £5 million loss a year, which can be boosted by a £30 million equity injection, giving allowable losses of £35 million a year. This works out to £105 million over the 3-year monitoring period. Furthermore, the Premier League's relaxed the regulations to neutralise the adverse impact of COVID. So the 22 monitoring period assessed the seasons 2019-20 and 2020-21 as a single average period. On this basis, Newcastle's pre-tax profit over the adjusted 3-year monitoring period up to 2021, the last published accounts, was a very healthy 44 million, which was £149 million better than the P&S maximum allowable loss of £105 million. So in addition to that, Newcastle can make a £30 million adjustment for healthy expenditure of a £10 million a year depreciation, women's football, youth development and community, giving a P&S profit of £74 million. Adding this to the £105 million allowable loss gives £179 million possible spend in the last transfer window. Finally, Newcastle can also adjust for the adverse COVID impact, which the club listed as 14 million in 2019-2020 and 26 million in 2021, giving a total of 40 million for revenue loss net of cost savings. This was then averaged to £20 million over the last 2 years. Therefore, Newcastle's £44 million pre-tax profit over the 3-year monitoring period was improved by 30 million, allowable deductions and £20 million COVID impact to give 95 million, adjusted P&S profit added to 105 million permitted loss. That meant that the total spending potential after 2021 was an impressive £200 million. Transfer fees are not fully expensed when a player is purchased, but are written off evenly over the length of the contract via player amortization. So if a player is purchased for 30 million on a 5-year contract, the annual amortization would be £6 million. For example, £30 million divided by 5 years. NUFC's ability to spend is partly due to their relatively low investment in the transfer market, although they did spend £250 million in the last 5 years, which is amazing. You don't think of it like that. This was firmly in the bottom half of the Premier League, though, behind the likes of Aston Villa, Wolverhampton Wanderers, Fulham and Southampton. This is important as it means that Newcastle could have actually spent much more on transfers than the £200 million P&S surplus, as only the impact on profits is considered for financial fair play. He then goes on to say that he'll later come to whether that would be advisable. As it stands, Newcastle's £32 million player amortisation 2021 was one of the lowest in the Premier League. This was partly due to prior year impairment, reducing player values in a shorter 11-month accounting period, but fundamentally reflects the club's limited transfer expenditure. The right way to look at NUFC's spending potential is as a combination of player amortisation to reflect transfers plus wages. On this basis, Newcastle United could have spent 600 million on transfers, given £120 million player amortisation, with an additional £80 million wages per annum. So the essential point here is that Newcastle could have spent 600 million and remained within the P&S limit, but would it have been the right thing for the club to do? Once more, for the cheap seats, it wouldn't really have made sense to use up all of the potential spending at once. It's also worth noting the impact of wages on the calculation. For example, if Newcastle transfer outlay was 200 million, with 200k weekly wages, say 4 players at 50k, the annual cost would be 50 million, but this would rise to 66 million with 500k weekly wages. That is another challenge for Newcastle, as they probably have to break the wage structure, which we've talked about on this show. As Manchester City discovered after their injection of funds, they needed to pay a premium to attract players to their project before there was a demonstrable success on the pitch. It's also important to note that Newcastle have spent money since the 2021 accounts. Their activity in 21-22 led to an increase in annual cost of 52 million, including the highest transfer spend in Europe in January: Bruno, Chris Wood, Kieran Trippier and Dan Burn. Adding the £58 million transfer spent to date this summer, obviously this was in August before we brought in Isaac, the £58 million transfer spent this summer on Botman, Target, Pope means a further £23 million impact on the Premier League 22-23 accounts. Therefore, Newcastle have already used up 74 million of the theoretical 200 million potential spend, and obviously now they've spent another 60 odd million on Isaac. So as a reminder, that 200 million P&S spending limit was based on the 3-year monitoring period up to 2021. But importantly, this is a moving target. In particular, that assessment included £23 million profit from 2017-2018, which falls out of the calculation the following season. So if we assume that Newcastle made a £10 million loss in 21-22, COVID impact deducted, 12th month of expenses, low profit from player sales, then the spending limit would be reduced by 33 million from 200 million to 167 million. So the situation's even worse looking at the P&S limit for 3 years to 22-23. First, we lose the £41 million profit from 2018-2019. Then the NUFC 22-23 loss would be 84 million. Considering 74 million increase in costs based on recruitment since 2021 accounts, leaving only 41 million pound potential spend. Nearly there, Ben. Of course, this is a very simplistic estimate, but it does illustrate the point that there's relatively little left of the 200 million pound potential spend, either because profitable years have dropped out of the P&S calculation or due to Newcastle's expenditure since 2021 accounts. This helps explain Newcastle's tight budget, as well as the club wanting to keep its powder dry for future transfer windows. And as Eddie Howe observed, the more money you spend in one window, the more it impacts on your ability to spend in windows beyond. So in reality, it's more difficult for Newcastle to copy Manchester City, who lost 562 million in the 5 years after ADUG's arrival. Howe again said, we can't just go out and spend money on players like maybe teams could have done in the past and totally change their squad within one transfer window. Where Newcastle will seek to emulate Manchester City is their incredible revenue growth. City's income was lower than the Magpies before the wealthy owners arrived, but it has shot up from 82 million to 570 million. Newcastle's Mirdad Gadusi said, what Sheikh Mansour has done there is fantastic. In order to spend more on players, Newcastle simply have to grow revenue in 2021. Their 140 million was only the 15th highest in the Premier League. Also, the comparison is distorted by different amounts of revenue deferred from 2019 to 2020. This was still less than a third of the top four. The obvious area to exploit is commercial, which actually failed to grow in all these 14 years at Newcastle. So Newcastle have fallen way behind their rivals. That £21 million in 2021 was less than a tenth of Man City, Man United and Liverpool. But more meaningfully, also below clubs like Brighton and Hove Albion, Aston Villa and Wolves. Last point, Newcastle's shirt sponsorship with Fun88 is only £8 million, though the deal has been terminated 2 years early, so Newcastle are free to sign a more lucrative deal from 2023 and have already agreed a £7.5 million noon sleeve sponsorship, but will look for arrangements for stadium naming rights, training kit and ground, etc. So give him a follow at Swiss Ramble because he does a lot of great stuff on not just Newcastle, all Premier League clubs. And for me, reading that through this morning before we came on air, it cleared things up for me massively. And I wish I'd read it, a bit more. I read into it a bit more. But Ben, give us your take on that. And is he right? I mean, this is a Twitter account. Is what he's saying it right? Has he made any basic errors? Do you think, or is that pretty much on the money?
It's an excellent thread. That's the first thing to say. And Swiss Ramble always does a brilliant job of going into the detail. There's a few things to bear in mind. One, that the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules and financial fair play are not the same thing. So profit and sustainability is what is being spoken about, and financial fair play is the European equivalent, which obviously becomes more to the fore if Newcastle United end up in European competition. The Premier League's version of financial fair play, P&S, as it is known, is less stringent than UEFA's financial fair play, especially after COVID, where you can offset far more losses. And that's been proven in the case of Everton, who have been able to declare much higher COVID losses than any other club in order to balance the books. So there's a little bit of opportunism there for a healthy, richer club to spend more because they can offset more due to COVID. And I think you'll find that Chelsea do that during this particular transfer window. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing is that clubs never declare the figures. So everybody has to some extent, make estimations based upon spending. Transfer fees are often disputed. And in addition to that, lengths of contract are not always 100% declared. And then finally, with wages, clubs will know those exact figures, and we obviously won't. And the challenge with wages in particular is that they can change. So you can do the maths now and say Newcastle can spend X, but if X leads to, let's just say, European qualification, and European qualification comes with a 25% bonus for all players, then moving forwards over the next, let's say, 5 seasons, Newcastle United's wage bill increases dramatically. And that's the kind of challenge, really, that success leads to financial increases, and financial increases can make your financial fair play or profit and sustainability margins a lot tighter. And in essence, that's the key point here with the Swiss Ramble article for Newcastle, that in theory, they can spend what they want. And by that, I mean the record spend in a window is Real Madrid in 2019 at around 285 million. So Newcastle could spend double that right now if we base it on the last window. But then what leeway will they have going forwards? And is that spend in theory within profit and sustainability now? But if that spend leads to success, does it stay within the margins? Because you're stuck with what you've spent. You're stuck with the promises you've made for who you've bought and already have at the football club. And then when you succeed, you might be reliant in the long term on commercial income, like shirt sponsorship, which is very low for Newcastle United. You might be reliant on future TV rights deals, and you're cut of them that you don't know about in 5 years and 7 years and 10 years and so on. But what you're stuck with is that group. And Leicester are finding this, by the way, as well, after winning the Premier League and getting into the Champions League, that group goes up and up and up as they succeed. They're contractually rewarded, and that makes your margins within the financial rules a lot thinner. And that, again, is why Eddie Howe said, we don't want to spend now for the sake of it. That's why the new ownership group don't want to throw a bunch of money out there now, because they might want to use that money at a later date. So Isaac's signing is quite a good example of that, because what it shows is that there was just that 60 million there. So when Newcastle were bidding for Maddison, the message from the club was very much like, we're not just going to spend big money for the sake of it. We've got to be conscious of the financial rules. And then when they found the right player that they thought was at the right value, they were able to bring in that 60 million. So the short answer is that the money is there. The margins are quite broad at the moment, but Newcastle have to project. And it's that projection which is tough, because the good news is that they expect higher value of commercial deals and ultimately television rights incoming, and bigger shares of the pot for tournaments, cups that they're not in at the moment, and even non-competitive stuff. So higher value from pre-season all the way through to Champions League income, which when you look at your incomings gives you even more leeway. But they then have to project and say, with that leeway, what will we need to spend? And that's where they will withhold healthy amounts of funds for when they get to the next step. And this is what patient ownership and strategy is all about. You don't just buy now for the sake of success tomorrow, because if you do, you might be in financial ruin. And if the success doesn't come, you're in even more trouble. So you stagger your spending and, as importantly, your strategy over 3 to 5 years. So then what you're doing is you're spending this season, regardless of where Newcastle finish, you're spending this season potentially still just to stay up, but certainly to finish 10th in the table. That will be the financial yardstick for Newcastle United. And that's not pessimistic. That's not the actual football target, just to be clear. That's the financial target. You either budget to stay up or you budget for top half based on what comes in for that. And then you spend accordingly to get the team there. And if you overperform, great. And then the next season, you look perhaps again for 10th or slightly better. And then after that, you probably go for Europa Conference League or Europa League, and you factor in what that will bring to your football club and what you need. And then you do that for a season or two. And after about the 5-year mark, you then obviously escalate that to try and challenge for the top 4. And that's what stability is from a purely financial point of view. Now, if Newcastle overperform on the football field, which is very possible, then you have to adjust that strategy. And again, that is why in adjusting that strategy, you got to leave some funds behind, because if you move too fast and you don't hope those funds there, then actually it's counterproductive, because you've got more games, you've got more expectation, you need a higher caliber of players, you need depth, and you actually don't have the money to go out and not only buy those players, but pay those players whilst rewarding your existing squad in a healthy manner. So it is essentially a walk first, run second strategy if we only look at it financially speaking, and it has to be in order to balance the books.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, a lot of people are asking, is this what's happening with Leicester now? Do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, it is and it isn't. So Leicester's strategy was ambitious, but also staggered over 4 or 5 years. And by moving very fast on the football field, they obviously did have to spend big, and they had to reward generously the players that they had. So before he left, Kasper Schmeichel and now Jamie Vardy, all on big wages, in order to keep players, even though ironically he ended up being sold to Chelsea. To get Wesley Fofana to sign in March, they had to offer big wages and a healthy long-term contract. And then on top of that, when they won the Premier League, when they got to the quarterfinals of the Champions League, there were huge rewards. And that makes it hard to get rid of either the deadwood or just incredible players that are past their peak. And once they pass their peak, they're still club legends. But at some point, you've got to move them on. And if you don't, then you're paying them a lot of money for a small percentage of involvement in games. So that was one of Leicester's problems. But Leicester have also just been hit hard by COVID as well. So it's not only the fact that Leicester didn't qualify in back-to-back seasons for the Champions League. It's not only the fact that they are falling backwards now and find themselves bottom of the table. It's also down to the fact that COVID has hit. And one of the biggest industries that has been hit by COVID is the air industry, and King Power, the Leicester owners, are part of that through duty free. So whereas planes are flying again, people are not spending as much time in airports. They're not buying as much as they used to, either because of their financial situation or they're just not in that position to come through. And then prior to COVID, King Power had to some extent fallen out with Thai royalty, who were giving them exclusivity to sell duty free in Thailand. And now they've got rivals as well. So you've got rivals, you've got COVID, you've got over success that's come very fast, and the need to spend and have depth. And then Leicester have also invested in a good way, but in the short term, it's hampered them a huge amount of money in a world-class training facility. And that has to go on the books as well, and stops them spending as freely. So there's a variety of factors, but Leicester are not ruined by the rules. They've just had to rein in. And it remains to be seen what the impact on the football club of reining in is for Leicester. But obviously, if you flash forwards and they are prudent and they can balance the books, then they're still left with very ambitious owners, an excellent training facility, which hopefully will create some homegrown talent that comes through and ultimately provides either success on the field or sell on value. And then Vardy and a few of the other older players, as has been proven with Wes Morgan historically, Kasper Schmeichel and so on, are all eventually going to be replaced. So Leicester are in more of a transitional period than a panic period, but it certainly wasn't a good window for them, and the finances that they inherited and under profit and sustainability and financial fair play definitely contributed to that.
Okay, Sandel says we are the 12th most expensively assembled squad in the world, rising 14 places from 12 months ago. Places above us are all the Italian clubs, still pretty significant. And Kevin says this all fits in with the termination of the Fun 88 sponsorship. We'll be looking for it, if not already agreed, a new sponsor. Yeah, and RIA been mentioned already this week on Twitter. Geordie Tumbalay says, before Ben gives us some figures, I'll guess Newcastle currently, as they stand sponsorship-wise, etc., could have up to £400 million to spend before financial fair play, and will go higher when new sponsorship comes in. I mean, it would be hard to put a figure on it because we don't know what sponsorship's going to come in. And going back through Swiss Ramble's eloquently put together thread, it shows you that there's so many things to take into consideration, Ben, before we could actually say this is what we've got to spend. And that's what the accountants and Dan Ashworth and the rest of the staff at St James's get paid for now. They're the ones who've got to make sure that there's no mistakes made on that, or heads will roll, I guess, with regards to positions at the club if mistakes are made with financial fair play. But these people that they've brought in are experts at the game, and they are people who know exactly what they are doing. And it's difficult to put a price on it, isn't it?
It's difficult to put a price on it, but by the same token, the number is big, and that's the good news for Newcastle. And again, there's two things here which the thread also very eloquently states. One is what Newcastle can spend. Two is what Newcastle may want to spend. And the want to spend is determined by what they may need now versus what they may want to withhold, because at a future date, that particular amount of money may be more valuable. So if you just pick a number now that Newcastle could spend in a window, it's probably around 600 million. And the other thing is the terms of contract and how money is spent are very important in this respect, because you don't pay transfer fees all in one go. You can spread them over a number of years. So all of these things factor into the creative accounting. And that's exactly what it is. When you do a deal, you try and get it in a way that you can offset payments and offset on the books under financial fair play or profit and sustainability over a number of years. And that allows you, therefore, to, in each yearly book and under the periods that financial fair play and profit and sustainability look at, appear healthier. And then, of course, the way that you deduct a COVID-related cost at the moment is also very creative, as I said before, as Everton have proved. So naturally, fans will want a number, but that number is very creative. And I agree with Swiss Rembo that it could be as high as 600 million if they did just want to blow all of their money across one window. But I think that Newcastle are not looking at the number because they can make most numbers work. They're looking at what is right to spend on the football side for what they need right now. And right now, they don't need a Neymar on 350,000 a week, or even an Mbappe. That's the type of player that a Newcastle fan would say, well, of course we'd take him, but it's strategy. And strategy is not just what you want and can afford. It's also what is realistic and likely for your football club. And that last part is out of your control. So why spend the money now that it would take to get, and I'm just using this as an example, Kylian Mbappe, and don't at me and say, well, he's not available, he's only just signed a new contract and so on. I'm talking hypothetically, because when you pitch to that kind of player now as Newcastle United, you have to offer them a lot more, because Newcastle don't have that leverage. Whereas if Newcastle wait, both financially and strategically, until they've got European or Champions League football, they'll find that they have to offer either shorter contracts to some players or less wages, depending on circumstances. It's the same with Cristiano Ronaldo, that if you were Newcastle and you had Champions League football, you could probably go to Ronaldo and say, we only are going to give you a 1-year contract and we're only going to pay you £300,000 a week. Whereas if you're a Saudi Arabian team chasing Ronaldo without any of that, then you would have to say, we'll give you a 5-year contract, even at the age of 37, and we'll give you £1 million a week. So that is factored in as well, your status at the time of trying to spend the money and how you lure in a player, which again is why Newcastle will budget to spend bigger amounts when they have more to offer. And by more to offer, I specifically mean European football. And that will also be factored into how they do all of this math. So the number is not really important as much as the strategy. It would be a little different if Newcastle were desperate to spend for a particular reason, like in January, in trying to stay up. Then they proved that under financial fair play and profit and sustainability, they did have that income to have a big January window. But now they've built that core. So what are they looking for this season if you're Eddie Howe? Not much, because they've brought in Isak. They already have Bruno on fire. Joe Linton was reinvented under the new ownership group. Dan Burn, Cher, Lascelles, all excellent. Botman has been brought in. Trippier, a marquee signing. Wood adds a little bit of depth. Wilson, when he's fit, scores goals. Almiron's reinvented himself. ASM still at the football club and able to contribute. And if Willock finds particularly the form and consistency when he was still a loanee at the football club and translates that game on game, another really great player that can play a huge part. So when you actually see the core, you can understand why Howe says if the aim is 10th, financially, if the aim is Europa Conference League in a best case scenario, or maybe Europa League, he's got everything he needs. So then in January, next summer, you don't necessarily need all of that money spent. And then in projecting the sponsorship side of things, which obviously gives you even more leeway, I think that one or two of the comments that have said the shirt sponsor is going to be important are absolutely right. And that's not just because they can get more money from the current deal. It's also because they can use that front of shirt sponsor for wider strategic aims. So pulling in an amount is one thing, but putting a Vision 2030 or the new Saudi Arabian national carrier is obviously going to tick other boxes away from football that fit into PIF's broader strategy. And if they can commercialize them and the deals are approved and at fair market value, then everybody will win. So Newcastle will be looking into that as well. And on their books, they will have a number. They might not have specific sponsors for absolutely everything, but they will have what's called a yardstick number based upon their rivals. And they'll have done their due diligence and they'll say, well, shirt sponsors for Premier League clubs at our current level are worth X. But we believe that that shirt sponsor might be 3 to 5 years. If that shirt sponsor is 3 to 5 years, where are we going to be in 3 to 5 years? And we believe that that shirt sponsor will have European football, or will have Champions League football, or will be in the top 4 in the Premier League. And then that puts X amount of eyeballs. And that is what's interesting about a shirt sponsor at the moment, that you have to leverage a projection and there's a compromise. And the shirt sponsor now is actually going to get an incredible deal if Newcastle United succeed. And Newcastle United are going to get an incredible deal if they don't succeed as quickly as they'd planned, because there'll be a middle number. So Newcastle will argue, we want X, because although we're not in European football now, we will be in 3 to 5 years. And the shirt sponsor will say, well, you're not there now, so we're prepared to pay you this amount, which is more than you're worth now. And then if you completely succeed in Champions League, then we ultimately will have got the best deal in the world. And that's how the negotiations will kind of work. And it might mean that the length of tenure is shorter. It might mean that it's staggered. So it will just start low now and go up if there's success. But sometimes clubs that I've been consultants for when I've worked on shirt deals, I can't name the clubs, but they were Premier League clubs at the time. And one Premier League club in particular that I was working with looked like they might go down and wanted a new shirt sponsor mid-season. And the debate that was had was exactly that the shirt sponsor said, what is going to happen if we pay big now and then the club goes down? Is there going to be a discount? Is there going to be an amendment to the deal? And the club in question said, no, we want a fixed rate come what may. And then the sponsor said, well, we'll give you a decent amount, but it's going to be lower than what you want, because at the moment you're third from bottom in the Premier League table. And that's kind of how the negotiation works. It's quite fluid, so it's difficult to project a number on it. But Newcastle will have basic yardsticks that they want from every commercial deal. They'll look at new revenue streams, and then they will factor that in to a long-term spending plan on the football side that keeps them within the rules. But they're pretty healthy at the moment. And ironically, the only thing that puts a question mark over the healthiness and the spend is how successful they are. Because if they potter along now at 8th in the table, 10th in the table, with good results, with stability, with a feel-good factor, there's enough money retrospectively in the kitty to spend quite healthily. But if they jump very quickly to European football, they'll have to spend a lot more. They'll have to increase their wage structure. And then at that point, over time, if they don't stabilize in European football, as Leicester have found, they'll have to rein it in again one day.
Couple of minutes left. I know you've got to get off. What happens if you break financial fair play or P&S points? Is it points deduction or a transfer ban or both? I mean, the severest penalty, I guess, which was stipulated, when this was brought in, was disqualification from European competitions. But I mean, there can be penalties, including fines, withholding of prize money, player transfer bans. I guess it just depends on how severe the rule breakage is.
I mean, the rules and the punishments are one thing on paper, but another thing after legal appeals and debate. And I think that is what frustrates a lot of people looking at either financial fair play or P&S, that there are supposedly quite severe punishments. And how often have we seen them implemented, and what kind of message does that send to clubs who break the financial rules? So the restriction within transfer windows and sanctions related to recruitment are obviously the biggest type of punishments that tend to be either threatened or implemented. And that has a huge impact. So that should not be taken lightly. But then when you look at the possibility of a points deduction, we don't see that ever, really. And I think that Everton's a good example of that. And then the final thing is just the grey area of creative accounting. So when a club on paper appears to have broken the rules, they seem to have the ability to then go through their books and declare things creatively, either using COVID or other longer standing tactics to balance the books. And during an appeals process, they have that chance. So I think with Newcastle, even though it should never be encouraged, we all know if they willingly, even though that's perhaps not the best word to use, broke the rules, if they knew what they were spending was going to put them in a difficult position with PNS or financial fair play, they also know that there's an appeals process, and they're going to hire Nick DeMarco again and be very confident of finding any creative loopholes. Until the figures are seen and declared, it's still a trust-based system. And without an independent regulator, it will always be the case. So right now, UEFA don't know what Newcastle are planning for a sponsorship deal. UEFA haven't done any assessment of fair market value, and they only would do that if a particular deal or number declared is challenged. And similarly, the Premier League work upon trust-based, because they can't be going through everyone's books every single day. So they receive the figures, they see the balance sheets, and if you declare a certain loss under COVID that you want to offset, as has been shown with Everton, they kind of accept that. So it is a flaw in the system. To be honest with you, it's one that Manchester City, it's one that Newcastle can take advantage of and do so legally as well. And when you find that legal loophole for creative accounting, you run with it to the benefit of your football club. So I'm not criticizing that, but if we look at it from a point of view of the Premier League wanting to give some kind of equality and parity towards all 20 clubs and make sure that the league is as competitive as possible, then you're going to find that the smaller clubs, those outside of the big six or big seven, if we're now making Newcastle part of it, at least in terms of their spending power, those other 13 clubs are going to be saying, where's the transparency? Where's the regulation? And should that regulation, as per the suggestion in the fan-led review, be independent? And I think this is what's really interesting about Newcastle in particular as a new player, that if you'd have asked fans 2-3 years ago, when Man City, when Chelsea and so on were finding money, spending money, dominating, there'll have been Newcastle fans that probably said, where is all of that? But now Newcastle have got the money. I think that some people's opinions may change and say we quite like the rules as they are now. So the punishments are very often threatened and very rarely implemented. So they're different for PNS and FFP. But in essence, you could get everything from being banned from signing players to banned from European competition to banned from, operating in future windows to denied the access that you need from the logistical side of things like registration. Because you're under these punishments, you can be deducted points. And ironically, if you don't have the money and you're in financial fair play ruin, you can be fined as well, which doesn't do a great deal to a club already in huge amounts of debt. But obviously, a lot of clubs may be in debt in theory, but still have that liquid capital to kind of pay the fines through loans or other means. So there's all kind of punishments. But I come back to what I said before. Under the current system, how often have any of these punishments been implemented? And when clubs know that, they perhaps take a few more liberty.
Great stuff as always, Ben. I know you've got to get off at 12. Thanks for coming on. We finally did it. We covered the financial fair play issue. Thank you to Swiss Ramble. I've given him enough shout outs for that wonderful tweet. Ben, look forward to catching up with you soon. I'm back tonight at 6 o'clock with Geordie's here. Geordie's there. Until then, speak to you soon. Take care.